Hey guys, it's George from Soundtracks, and I really wish I could be there with you guys this weekend at the Missouri Pacific Historical Society meet. Unfortunately, due to some scheduling circumstances, I've been unable to attend this year. I will try again for next year and see if we can make it work out. I was asked to give a presentation, and unfortunately, due to scheduling conflicts, I couldn't make it. So I put together this little video for you to kind of give you some of the highlights of what I wanted to cover and talk about with the Soundtrack's new Tsunami2 and how to set it up for your Missouri Pacific models. Now, because this is a video, obviously I won't be able to do any questions and answers, but feel free to call me or email me at the office, and I will be happy to answer any questions I can for you. And let's start a dialogue and see what we can do to help you out. Now, with the Tsunami2, of course, we have steam versions and diesel versions and electric versions, and Missouri Pacific owned mostly just steam and diesel. But what I want to do is take some time to show you some of the features, operational and just sound sets, that we can help you, that you can set up your models to run more realistically as they did in the day of the Missouri Pacific Railroad. Now, with this short video time, I'm going to be focusing mostly on what I have already installed, which is mostly Missouri Pacific second generation. Personally, I model 1978 Missouri Pacific, which has a good mix of first and second generation diesel power. Most of the ones I do have already installed on the layout, though, are second generation or would be considered second generation. So we'll talk about some of those, and I'll try to put together some other videos in the future that will help cover some of the steam setup and maybe even some of the early diesels as they were delivered to the Missouri Pacific. Now, with the Tsunami2, we've done a lot of operational features built into the decoder. Now, first off, one of the biggest things that the difference between the Tsunami2 and the original Tsunami is the onboard amount of memory is so big that we've been able to cram most of our sounds into one or just a few decoders. For example, Steam Decoder has one Steam Decoder, and on that decoder you get multiple exhaust chuffs, multiple whistles and bells to choose from. Well, on our diesel decoders, diesel recordings take a lot of time, and so because of that, we have it divided up by family. So there's an EMD decoder, and all of our EMD recordings are on one decoder as opposed to spread out over multiples like they were in the original Tsunami. This allows you as the modeler to be able to simply select the prime mover that matches the model that you're installing, and then you have our entire collection of horns and bells to choose from so that you can make your locomotive match more prototypically than we ever could before. There's also other operational setup and features that help distinguish and enhance your operations that will give you more of a first-person experience from operating as it was in the heyday of the Missouri Pacific. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about setup, and we're going to set up some locomotives. We're going to show you how the Tsunami2 can be adjusted by simply using CVs or configuration variables to select the prime movers and bells and other operational features for each locomotive so that they'll perform realistically. Then we'll talk about how operational features are built into the decoders that you can help enhance your operations. So without any further ado, let's get started. Let's go ahead and set up some locomotives. Now, one of the advantages of the Tsunami2 is that you select the decoder by family. So all of these EMD products that you see here on the screen are all using the same EMD decoder, just with selections that vary based on the prime mover that's equipped in each of the locomotives. So the SW900 that's in the background, the SD40-2, the MP15 up front, the GP38 and the GP15 are all using the same EMD decoder, but with different selections in CV123 to determine which prime mover sounds. Now, one of the advantages of the Tsunami2 also is you have 42 air horns to choose from. And on there is the RS3LR that the Missouri Pacific used. And 4 of these locomotives are equipped with that, but the SW900 in the background is equipped with a Leslie A200. And this is chosen in CV120. Now, other things is there's different bells on each of these locomotives. You've got several EMD bells to choose from, several cast bells, several gong bells, and things like that that you're able to choose from that also adjust the bell ring rate that allow you to really customize the decoder to match the model. So let's take a listen to a couple of these and see how they sound. You have a similar situation here with these two GE U-boats. You have a U-23B that's using our FDL12 selection off of the GE decoder in CV123. And then in the U-30C, you have our FDL16 in CV123 that's selected. Now, one of the other things, the U-30B is one of the first ones delivered on the MoPac. And on that, those were delivered with gong bells. And so in CV122, you were able to make that selection to make sure that you have the proper bells selected for the locomotive of choice. Now, I've heard a lot of people say that GE should have stuck to washing machines, and the MoPac kind of agreed to a certain level. With that, let's just hear the different bells here. So first we'll start with the U-23. And then we'll move over to the U-30C, and you can hear the gong bell. So selecting sounds is one of the things that the Tsunami2 allows you to do to make sure that you've got the proper sounds selected for your locomotive. In addition to the prime mover and the air horn and the bell that we've discussed, you can also select the type of air compressor that's used to make sure that you match the locomotive sounds to the model that you're working on. Now, with sound selection, you can see the full list and roster of the sounds that are on each of our decoders, whether it be an EMD, a GE, an Alco, or the Baldwin and others, which I lovingly refer to as the land of misfit toys, because it has all of the sounds that didn't justify their own separate decoder. Now that we've talked about setting up the sound, let's try to set up some of the operational features that we can really enhance the operation of our railroads. Now let's talk about lights for a little bit. With the Tsunami2, we've advanced the lighting features in quite a bit that allows you to faithfully reproduce the different lights. We call them hyperlights, but these are things like Mars lights, gyro lights, rotary beacons, all kinds of things like that. But some of the new features that we've built into the decoder is constant dim, and you can have two brilliances. You can have a constant dim 1, constant dim 2, and you can even adjust the brilliance of these by using a CV. So let's take a look here at the headlight with the normal brilliance, and you can kind of see how bright that is. Now, using the same value resistor, we're able to illuminate the class lights. And you can see those lights on now, and you'll notice that they're significantly dimmer, much more like they were in the prototype world. They don't look like two additional headlights of the locomotive moving down the track. Now, this is adjusted using a CV. So I can adjust the brilliance of this. So for example here, we're going to take, in this case, CV61. We're going to set it to 150, and you're going to notice how much brighter those lights got. Now let's take CV61, we're going to set it to 255. And you can see now that those lights are a lot brighter. So let's take CV61, let's set it down to about 50, and let's see what that looks like. Well, that looks about right. So you can kind of see that they're dimly lit, they're clear, therefore indicating an extra, and they're distinctly different in brilliance than the headlight. Now, as I mentioned, there's a second dim called dim 2 that's also one of the hyperlights, and that one uses CV62 to adjust the brilliance. So this is where you can have things like number boards or truck running lights with different brilliances so that you can more faithfully reproduce the lights that are actually on the locomotives. One of the features of Soundtrack's products dating back to the original Tsunami and is evident in the Economy and the Tsunami2 is the ability to adjust every individual volume level, whether it be an air horn, a bell, a prime mover, or subtle sound effects like the brake squeal, brake release, or in this case, we're going to talk about the dynamic brake volume. Now, most of the Missouri Pacific second generation diesels were delivered without dynamic brakes, with the exception being the SD40-2C. These were designated as coal service and built to Burlington Northern specs for interchange service on the Powder River Basin. So other railroads used dynamic brakes, but the Missouri Pacific did not. They used power braking, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But here's where setting up the decoder can become a little fun. We'll take our dynamic brake volume and set it to a value of 0. So F4, traditionally applying the dynamic brakes, will still affect the operation of the locomotive, but you won't hear the dynamic braking sound. Now, in our engine control CV, in the Economy and the Tsunami2 is CV114, we have an ability for the dynamic brake application to affect the operation of the prime mover. It'll either drop to idle, notch 4, as they did with the SD40-2Cs, or notch 8, traditionally with Alco and GE locomotives. So without dynamic brake equipped, if this was in a consist of other locomotives and they applied the dynamic brakes, there obviously is no fan sound, but the prime mover would drop to idle, again, since there's no sense using extra fuel if you're riding the brakes down grade. So by setting this in CV114, you can set the prime mover to drop to idle, you can set the dynamic brake volume to 0, and you'll still have a prototypical operating locomotive, but you won't have to lose the operation of the dynamic brakes. Now in CV116, there is also a dynamic braking rate that will slow the train down once dynamic braking is applied, but will never actually stop the locomotive. It'll take it down to about speed step 8, which is roughly about 10 miles an hour or so. And so this way you have a realistic control for your train, but still with dynamic braking. So if you were to run this locomotive in a consist with others that dynamic brakes were applied, when you hit the F4, then all of the locomotives will apply their dynamic braking rates, but your locomotive is not going to be fighting against the others in the consist. One of the new features of the Tsunami2 sound decoders is our Reactive Dynamic Digital Exhaust, or DDE. And what this does is this allows the prime mover to be adjusted based on what the locomotive is actually doing, instead of having to push buttons or play with your throttle and instead lose control of your locomotive, to notch the prime mover up or down for a heavier train. Now the key point here is there is a small calibration process that takes place so that the decoder knows exactly what the motor needs for moving the locomotive light on flat level track, so that the DDE processor of the decoder can take over and adjust the notching accordingly. So let's take a look at how we set this up. So with our locomotive on flat level track, we're going to program CV2.503 while the locomotive is moving forward at speed step 1. This way the decoder can calibrate the baseline minimum power consumption of a light locomotive so that the DDE processor can take over. And we're going to set CV2.503 to a value of 255. And now the decoder has been calibrated for the baseline power consumption. Now with our locomotive moving at speed step 20 through 40, somewhere in there, we're going to let this locomotive run while we calibrate CV2.504 to a value of 255, and that maintains a middle of the road power consumption for our motor on flat level track. So let's let it run for a second. settle in. We're going to program. And then now we can stop our locomotive. So now that our motor power consumption chart has been calibrated using CVs 2.503 and 2.504, we're now going to set the sensitivity. And this determines how sensitive the locomotive is to changes in the load on the motor. And that's in CV 2.512. So to program this, we're going to start at a relatively low value because we want to make sure we get a good realistic effect. And we can fine-tune this as we work our way through the operation. So we're going to try setting this at a nominal value of 35. Now we're going to add a little bit of momentum into CV3 and 4. Now let's see how that exhaust sounds when we run this locomotive again forward at speed step 3. You hear it throttle up a little bit, but it's not much of a change. But where the dynamic digital exhaust really shines is once we put a load behind our train. Let's check it out. Now let's listen to this same locomotive with our settings as we've calibrated as we pull a modest train, again moving forward at speed step 3. So you can kind of see how dynamic digital exhaust really does help the realistic effect of running your train. Once we've set up our dynamic digital exhaust, the next thing I like to do is add a little bit of momentum. Now, the momentum is set in CV3 and 4, and you can adjust for your personal tastes or your railroad. Personally, I like to use a lot of momentum because this forces my operators to use the brakes to stop my train. More on that in just a second. So with a high momentum rate, it takes me a few seconds longer to get going, and then with a higher deceleration rate, I can cut my throttle. You'll hear the prime mover drop down, and you'll hear the locomotive as it coasts in, and then I can use my brakes to set and pick up my cars or drop my cars wherever I need to be. Now, with the Tsunami2, we've actually reinvented the way brakes work. With the original Tsunami, we had our F11, which was a very popular feature and allowed the operators to use the F11 brake to apply the brake and stop the train. But the sound was that of the independent, and that is the sound of the locomotive brakes, as its name implies. And the independent brake works on positive air pressure, which means when the cylinders are filled with air, the brake shoes are applied and it brings the locomotive to a stop. Let's take a look at it in action. You'll hear the bail off. Now as I coast in, I can cut the throttle and I can toggle my brakes on and off to make my set. Now this particular coupling didn't work, so let's reset our knuckle. So now we're going to reverse. And now you're going to hear our dynamic digital exhaust cut in as the locomotive is working a lot harder to pull this cut of cars. And as I cut the throttle, and then I set my brakes so I can stop my train where I want to. Now once we've built our train, we're ready to tie in with the road power. So let's back up and we're going to pick up our train. Again, we're going to use the independent brake. We're going to pull forward slightly to prove it's coupled. We're set and ready to go. Now this is where the Tsunami2 really shines, because now we're going to set the train into automatic brake mode. And this is going to simulate all the sounds of the automatic or the train brake. So first, when we're tied in, the first thing we of course have to do is to pump up our train line. So we're going to turn on function 12. And this is going to trigger our train to go into charging mode. And what you're going to hear is you're going to hear the compressor cycle, and then you're going to hear the prime mover notch up as it tries to cycle the compressor faster so it can more quickly charge the train line. And it'll run like this for about 30 seconds. In the real world, it usually took about 10 to 15 minutes to charge the entire train line. But of course, we can't ask modelers to sit there that long. So we've chosen about 30 seconds to give the effect, but an overall time that you have to wait. So now you hear the prime mover dropping down. And now we're ready to go. So once we get our clear signal, we've got our class lights on, so we're running as an extra. And let's go ahead and go. So we'll signal our whistle signal. We'll go ahead and get started. And then we'll release our brakes, and you're going to hear the independent bail off. And we'll start moving at speed step 1 to pull the slack out of the train. And once we get moving, we can increase the throttle. Now when you're using your brakes, you can actually feather them on and off. So you can set, start to bring your train to a stop, turn them off, and reapply until you're set and stopped where you need to be. Nothing says you have to leave them on or leave them off. This allows you to be the engineer, so you can grab air when you need to, and you can release the brakes when you need to make sure you stop at the proper place for each of those signals. Now here's where it becomes really fun. Now once we're done setting up our locomotives, now the fun begins, because now it's time for operation. So with these 3 locomotives, I'm consisting them using advanced consisting in CVs 19, 21, and 22. And this allows the consist alias to respond to a single address. In this case, I'm going to use address 20, and the locomotives will respond based on their position in the consist using CVs 21 and 22. For example, the lead locomotive is going to blow the horn, ring the bell, turn on your lights, use your brakes, and so forth, but the trailing units are going to only apply the brakes, and maybe the last unit might do a coupler sound or the reverse headlight, which can be set up. But I'm not going to be doing that this way. I've got my lights all on my lead locomotive. So here's what we're going to do. The first thing we have to do is we have to start up each locomotive. Now when the locomotive is in a consist, it will still respond to function commands sent to its address. So to start up these locomotives, each individually, I'm going to send a command for F5, which is our diesel engine startup, to each of the locomotives. So here I'm going to select locomotive 2272, and I'm going to press F5, and you're going to hear it individually start up. Now the next one we're going to start up is going to be 2965. So as our engineer works from one locomotive to the other, we select 2965 in our cab and we press the F5. Now our engineer gets out of that locomotive, works his way up to the lead locomotive 3039, and now we're going to use our F5 and we're going to start that prime mover. So now that all three units have started up, now I select my consist address. As I mentioned, in this case, we're going to select Loco 20. Now we're going to back up and pick up our consist. So as we back our locomotives onto the train, we'll use the independents so we can stop our locomotives and pick up the cars. So now that we've tied into the train, we're going to move forward to prove that we're coupled. Once we've proved we're set, now we tie in our airlines. And now we're going to turn on our automatic or train brake mode. And you're going to hear the compressor cycling as they're rushing to charge the train line to make sure that we've got enough air in our system so when we run our train, we can set the air. Once the train line is charged, we're ready to go. We're going to move forward in speed step 1 to pull the slack out, and we're going to release our brakes. And first, whistle signal. So once we've got our train out and on the road, this is where Tsunami2 really mimics the operation of the Missouri Pacific locomotive engineers. With the automatic brake that we've showed you here, you can see how the railroad brake comes to life with the sounds. You'll hear the air set as the locomotive comes to a stop. But what's really cool is that the MoPac operators used what's called power braking. And what they would do is typically run their throttle up while they set the automatic brake so that the locomotives were pulling against the cars to make sure that the cars were dragging the locomotive to a stop, as well as making sure that the guy in the caboose had a smooth ride. Now, this power braking can be done in Tsunami2. So what we're going to do is we're going to press F10, which is our straight to 8 feature. We're going to set our air in function 11, and then as our locomotive comes to a stop, you're going to hear the prime movers pulling against the train, and the brake rate set in CV118 will bring the locomotive and the train to a stop. Now, where this is really fun is Soundcar, our sound system for rolling stock, actually has a braking rate and brake squeal set in the sounds. And so what's really cool is when you set your brakes in your locomotive, you can hear the sound in the sound car. You'll hear the air reduction in the cab of the locomotive, but then you'll actually hear the squealing coming from the cars. Let's see it in action. Now, we've spent a lot of time talking about how to set up Tsunami2 in our locomotives, but we've also been able to cater to the MoPac modeler with our sound car decoder. This is a decoder that's designed for creating the rest of the sound of the train, including the clickety-clack, flange squeal, brake release, brake application. You'll hear the cylinders set, handbrake tie down and release. You'll also can even turn on the sound of a flat spot. And these are designed for the rolling stock, so when you have your CV set appropriately, they will match the speed and operation of your locomotive. So as we've talked about, when we do our brake application from the cab, the cylinders are set on the trailing cars on the train. And so with Soundcar, you can reproduce that. We also have included 4 lighting functions that you can use for any lighting for your rolling stock, whether it be, in this case, a flashing rear end device, or if you have cab car, you can have headlight, backup light, push-pull, ditch lights, all kinds of things. And if you're clever enough and you've detailed the interior, you can actually illuminate the firebox flicker of an onboard stove. Now, in this Blueford Shops HO scale shorty bay window, I've only got the flashing rear end device, or the Fred, mounted on the back. But in addition to the lighting and the other sounds, we also have the sound of a caboose whistle. When the railroads were using the cabooses as the front of a train during a shoving move for over a great distance of time, a lot of times the conductor would tie into the airline and he would have an air whistle so they could blow their grade crossing sequence and be FRA compliant. Well, on these shorty bay windows, the air whistle was already built there, so these were designed to be also used as shoving platforms. And one of the bonus features is that your sound card decoder is actually equipped with an MP whistle for the caboose. Let's see it in action. Hey guys, thanks for letting me talk to you this weekend. With all the features that we built into the Tsunami2, we've just barely scratched the surface on how these decoders can really bring your railroads to life. Now, I know we touched base mostly on the second generation products for EMD and GE here in our little demonstration. But there are a lot of features that can be applied to first generation and Steam, and I'll be probably putting together some videos for those later on down the line. With all the features we've talked about, if you have any questions or if you want to just discuss some things, just give me a call or email me at georgeb@soundtracks.com, and I'll be happy to help answer any questions I can for you. Thanks, guys, for letting me talk to you, and I hope you had a great weekend.